So this is Temur Energy. This is a deck that I'm sure many players are familiar with at this point in Standard. My list is a little bit different than most of the typical ones you'll see that are out there. And you'll see that, yeah, most of the energy cards are pretty straightforward. They show up in every list of Temur Energy that you'll see. There's still a couple slots, though, that you can play around with in the deck. So as far as the mana base goes, one card I do want to highlight here is the Sheltered Thicket. I like having the ability to have a couple cycle lands in my list because this deck is pretty vulnerable to flooding out. You have 4 Attune with Aethers, which are essentially lands, and then Servant of the Conduit, an additional mana source. So you want to be able to have these lands that you can turn into spells when you are top decking later in the game. I also only have 3 basic forests, 1 basic island, and 1 basic mountain. Reason being there is that you don't want to draw too many basics, and I have found that simply it's enough. For Attune with Aether, you don't need more than 5 basics in your deck. You're almost always going to have a second red beyond the basic mountain, and yeah, just experimenting with the mana base, this is what I've come to, and I've liked it the most of the various mana configurations that I've tried. So Attune with Aether, yeah, it's going to be in any energy deck that plays green. So my list is a little bit less prepared for decks like Mardu Vehicles and Ramuna Bread Game 1. It's more geared towards the mirror, control, and tokens. And that's kind of based off of the metagame right now and what you're seeing online. That's why you only see essentially 5 spot removal spells, and this is essentially an all-time low. I don't see any lists that play this few spot removal spells, but the problem with a card like Magma Spray or Abrade is that when you do go up against control or tokens, they're practically dead cards. So I've decided to kind of hedge in the other direction. So there's 1 Magma Spray, 4 Harness Lightning. Harness Lightning is the best removal spell, of course. Essence Scatter, yeah, you can use it as removal, but it's kind of shaky. It's versatile, though. It's a nice versatile counterspell. I've gone with 1 Essence Scatter and 1 Supreme Well. Supreme Well is, yeah, you can also use it to impulse to look for action. And the fact that you can counter a non-creature spell like a Confiscation Coup in the mirror is a pretty big deal. Of course, there's 4 Longtusk Cubs and Servant of the Conduits. Longtusk Cub is much better when you're on the play, so in many matchups when I'm on the draw, I will tend to board out the Longtusk Cubs. Meanwhile, I'll likely keep them all in if I'm on the play. 4 copies of Rogue Refiner, arguably the best energy creature just because it draws you a card. Whirler Virtuoso, yeah, you can play 3 or 4 of these, but I like having 4 because it's basically good in every matchup. You don't really want to draw 2 of them a lot of the time, but it's not normally that bad for you. The Thopters are really good against any of the aggressive decks that have 1 toughness creatures. Chandra is good against the Mirror and any of these control and token decks. Having another Axis to attack a deck that has Fumigate in it is really important. Bristling Hydra is one of the strongest creatures in the deck. You want to have these creatures that are extremely hard to deal with. So Bristling Hydra and also Carnage Tyrant provide you with hexproof creatures that your opponent can't just take off the board whenever they want to. I've been happy with the Carnage Tyrant. It's unique here, but it's a one of at the top of your curve that control decks are not expecting. So you can just kind of slam it against blue-black control. They have no removal that deals with it, no counter spells that deal with it. They have to go to cards like sideboarded Bantu's Last Reckoning as their best answer for it. So, yeah, it's quite good. And in the mirror, it's good. So it's just a solid card. Then the Glory Bringers, of course, are standard 5-mana creatures here. And then Confiscation Coup is not only good in the mirror, but it's your best answer to an opposing copy of the Scarab God. Probably the scariest creature you can possibly see on the other side of the table. So moving on to the sideboard, another Carnage Tyrant comes in those same sort of control-ish matchups. Slice and Twain. So this is good against control because they have cards like Torrential Gearhulk and Search for Ascanta, but it's really good against the token decks because the most annoying cards that they have are cards like Anointed, Procession, Hidden Stockpile, and I like this a little bit more than other artifact and enchantment removal spells in the format, like Appetite the Unnatural, because it draws you a card, and you always want to have more gas in hand, especially in the matchups that are grindier. So I've liked the Slice and Twains. Vizier of Many Faces is for the mirror. You can copy a Bristling Hydra, a Virtuoso, Rogue Refiner, whatever. Then when it dies, you get to do it again. So it's basically the best creature I think you can have for the mirror, but it's not great in other spots. So I've gone with a 2-1 split in terms of counter magic here. Some negates, and then also a Spell Pierce. I like having a little bit of a mix. It keeps your opponent on their toes. Sometimes on the draw, you can Spell Pierce a card like Hidden Stockpile or Search for Ascanta, and it can just completely shift the game in your favor. There are 2 Chandra's defeats. They come in against Mono Red, or Ramunap Red, I should say. They also come in sometimes in the mirror. Like, against this list, you want to be able to deal with Chandra and deal with Glorybringer, especially when you're on the draw. And I've also boarded them in against Mardu Vehicles. So, actually, more spots where you board in Chandra's defeat than just Ramunap Red. This is the only copy of a Braid I have in the 75. Card is good, but it's only good in certain matchups. So if you're up against an aggressive deck or in the mirror on the draw, I want it. Deathgorge Scavenger is a solid card against Ramunap Red, against any type of graveyard deck. So it's pretty good when it's good. Another Magma Spray for aggressive decks, and then Nissa Steward of Elements. I like Nissa on the play in the mirror and against any type of control and tokens deck. Kind of like Chandra, it's another Planeswalker that you basically, the opponent needs some type of pressure on it, or else you say you play it on 3, then you can scry 2. The next turn, you can set up putting a Virtuoso or Rogue Refiner or some other type of creature into play. And then when you draw it late game, you can just 10 your opponent. Just play for 8, make 2 lands, 5/5 flyers, and deal your opponent 10, and sometimes that just wins you the game. So it's really been quite good for me. And this is the list that I'm running right now.